Your contributions to the company are no longer of any value.
That's what they told me word for word just 12 hours before my retirement dinner. My name is Douglas Hale, and I'm 61 years old. 29 years of building Parker systems from a dusty warehouse in Phoenix into a global logistics empire, and they tossed me out like a broken printer. The man delivering the line? Gavin Pike, the newly crowned CEO. But the real architect of my removal? His daughter, Lila Pike, is 26 years old, barely 2 years out of grad school, and armed with a marketing degree, a LinkedIn perfect smile, and last name leverage. I didn't argue. I didn't plead. I smiled, logged out, and walked away. Because I'd built more than operations, I'd built the gate. And the $200 million Arctic Gateway contract. It needed my voice to open. Without it, they were locked out for good. I stood there for a moment, staring at the screen. My cursor still blinked beside the final verification line for the Arctic Gateway contract, waiting for a voice it would never hear again. No handshake, no farewell speech, no hallway nods, just a cardboard box already set beside my chair, as if someone had known in advance. The office I'd built, where I'd spent more time than my living room, suddenly felt foreign. Cold, quiet. No one looked up as I walked out. People I'd mentored, hired, trained, they kept their eyes glued to blank screens or whispered behind coffee mugs. It was like I'd already been deleted from the building. Back at my desk, I slid open the top drawer, a few pens, a stress ball, and a faded photo of the original founding team. Most of them are gone now. I took the picture and left the rest. My nameplate had already been removed from the glass wall outside my office and replaced with a sleek new plaque that read, Lila Pike, VP of Strategic Ventures. They didn't even wait until morning. I just wiped my name and my title like I'd never existed. But the system, the one they didn't bother asking about, that still remembered me line by encrypted line. I sat down at my desk one last time, not to fight or linger, but to witness the end properly. The chair still held my shape, creaking in that familiar way when I leaned back. I opened the main terminal with my admin credentials. No alarms, no security pings. They hadn't even revoked my access. I didn't delete anything that mattered to the company. But I cleared every personal draft, every training document, every internal memo I'd written over the past 3 decades. Manuals no one else had updated. Templates no one knew how to use. I took only what was mine. A worn leather, bound notebook filled with hand-sketched workflows, backup passwords, and notes from client calls across 4 continents. Then I opened one last directory vault layer. Arctic, Gateway, Final. Tucked inside was a program I'd built months ago after a near breach during a back-end migration. It looked like a harmless checksum routine, but behind it was a biometric gate locked to my voice, terminal ID, and physical coordinates. Only then can I activate the final authorization line. They thought removing my title erased my presence, but they'd forgotten one thing. Legacy doesn't live in titles. It lives in systems. And this one still answered to me. 6 months ago, after a cyber attack nearly compromised our South Asia procurement servers, I stayed up 3 nights in a row writing a contingency protocol, not because anyone asked, because I knew no one else would. That script became the final layer of Arctic Gateway's security architecture, clean, unassuming, embedded deep within the infrastructure. On the surface, it looked like a simple validator file, but buried inside was something else. A 3-point biometric handshake voice, terminal MAC address, and geolocation. It wasn't paranoia. It was protection. For the company, for the deal, for the work I'd spent half my life building. No one knew it was there, not even the security team. Just me and Janine, our former CTO, who signed off on it before leaving for a fintech firm in Seattle. It was our insurance policy. Now, it was a wall no one could climb. As I logged out for the last time, I didn't feel anger. I felt precision. Let them promote Lila. Let them polish press releases and parade innovation. The contract wasn't theirs to close. Not really. Because of the code, it didn't recognize rank or last names. It recognized me, Douglas Hale, age 61, architect of the gate. The next morning, I sat on my back porch in Scottsdale with a cup of black coffee, watching the sun rise over the desert. The heat hadn't kicked in yet, and the quiet felt almost ceremonial. That's when the first notification hit my phone, a press release from Parker Systems. Parker Systems proudly announces the appointment of Lila Pike, 26, as Vice President of Strategic Ventures, following her leadership role in successfully executing the $200 million Arctic Gateway contract. Successful execution? I nearly dropped my coffee. I opened the complete press kit, and there she was, Lila Pike, in a snow-white pantsuit, seated at my old desk. In my old chair, one manicured hand resting on a stack of mock briefing folders she couldn't possibly understand. The headline? Next Gen Leadership, How a Young Visionary is Disrupting Logistics Security. Visionary? She couldn't pronounce logistics architecture in last quarter's all hands. But that didn't stop her from basking in the limelight. The interview clip was even worse. Lila leaned in like she was giving a TED Talk to toddlers, speaking in a syrupy tone about strategic intuitions and catalyzing momentum, buzzwords wrapped in glitter and hot air. Then came the quote, "When I reviewed the final clearance specs, I knew it was time to push the envelope. The client trusted me to move decisively, and I delivered." She hadn't reviewed anything. She hadn't even been cleared to access the Vault Layer directory. The worst part? People were buying it. Comments poured in, "This is what modern leadership looks like," and "Proof the old guard needs to make room for fresh vision." Some executive I'd never met reposted it with a caption, "Bold, elegant, necessary." I stared at the screen, silent. Not because I was defeated, but because I had seen this before, how confidence without competence gets elevated when it wears the right last name. They could crown her all they wanted, but beneath the surface, I knew something they didn't. The system hadn't crowned her. It hadn't even acknowledged her. At precisely 9:17 a.m., Parker Systems' executive boardroom filled with tension. Lila Pike, 26, polished, poised, and entirely unqualified, sat at the head of the table with her laptop open, preparing to finalize the Arctic Gateway deal. The room was quiet, except for the occasional shuffle of papers and nervous throat clears. On screen, a single command window pulsed with the words, "Voice confirmation required, Level 3 clearance." She clicked. Then, I clicked again. Nothing. Her brows furrowed. "Is this normal?" she whispered to Brent, the company's weary-eyed manager. He leaned in, checked the prompt, then went pale. This is looking for origin clearance." "In English?" Lila snapped, trying to smile through clenched teeth. Brent swallowed. "It's looking for Douglas's terminal," his voice, "the original system credentials. This gateway wasn't designed for remote override. It's hard-coded." The room shifted. One executive coughed into his fist. Another pretended to check his watch. Gavin Pike, CEO, father, and architect of this embarrassment, stood frozen at the window, his jaw tight. "Can't you just reset it?" Lila asked, panic now tinging her voice. "Not without wiping the contract log entirely," Brent replied. "Doing so would trigger compliance audits, legal flags, and a rollback request from the client. It would nullify the signature chain." Gavin spun around, then called Douglas. Brent shook his head slowly. "We revoked his access yesterday." Silence. Outside that boardroom, across town, I was seated at a small cafe near Camelback Road, eating a quiet breakfast when my phone buzzed. It was a message from Jacob, one of the few IT analysts who still respected how systems worked. "They're panicking. The gate won't open. Lila's stuck. Everyone's watching." I didn't reply. Instead, I took another sip of coffee and smiled softly, inwardly. The system was doing exactly what I designed it to do. It wasn't revenge, it wasn't sabotage, it was integrity, encoded line by line. And now, the people who erased me were learning the cost of pretending architecture doesn't matter until it refuses to move without you. At 10 a.m. sharp, Parker Systems went live with a company-wide broadcast titled Strategic Milestones and New Leadership Direction. The video opened with sweeping drone footage of their new Mesa headquarters, backlit logos, aircraft carriers, and mock-ups of global expansion. It all looked impressive until you realized what was missing. Not one mention of the system that made it all possible. Not one mention of me. Then, the feed cut to the auditorium. Gavin Pike stood center stage, sleeves rolled, face rehearsed but tight. "Today marks a new era of innovation at Parker Systems," he began, his voice warm, confident, and false. "We honor our legacy while leaning into the future." Behind him, 2 LED walls displayed buzzwords: agility, insight, evolution. And then came the moment. "It is my great pleasure to introduce the woman leading this next chapter," he continued. "Please welcome Vice President of Strategic Ventures, Lila Pike." The applause was strained, delayed, and only half-hearted. Lila walked out in a muted lavender suit, smiling like she hadn't just watched a system reject her minutes earlier. She took the mic and launched into a speech filled with an empty cadence. "This contract represents not just a financial milestone, but a philosophical one. We are shifting from legacy dependency to adaptive flow." I almost laughed. From where I sat, legacy wasn't a crutch. It was the skeleton. And without it, they were clapping for a body that couldn't stand. Then came the slide deck. Key milestones. Contract timeline. Final authorization marked completed. It was a lie. And someone had labeled it executed in bold green letters. In the audience, I noticed one familiar face, Marcus Devlin from our client's side. His brows were furrowed. His phone was already in hand. The broadcast continued, but the momentum was gone. The cheers dulled. The camera panned awkwardly across the room and caught one senior director, Angela, from legal, shaking her head slowly, as if realizing the charade in real time. They had the crown, yes, but the gate was still closed. And now, the world was watching a ceremony for a victory they hadn't earned and couldn't unlock. By noon, I was back in my home office. The blinds were drawn against the Arizona sun, and the room was still except for the soft ping of an incoming email. The subject line read, "Follow-up on Arctic Gateway Agreement." It was from Marcus Devlin, Senior Procurement Lead at Kestrel Logistics, the client. "Douglas, I hope this note finds you well. We were surprised not to see you involved in this morning's leadership announcement. There's some confusion on our end. The finalized version of the contract we received yesterday includes structural edits we didn't review, several formatting changes, and a missing metadata signature line. Can you confirm who is overseeing implementation from Parker's side now?" Marcus asterisk. I stared at the screen. They hadn't told him. No handover. No introduction. There was no explanation that I'd been pushed out 12 hours before the final authorization. Worse, they'd sent a doctored version of the contract, hoping no one would notice that the biometric clause I'd embedded had been quietly deleted from the execution draft. I opened a reply window, fingers hovering. Legally, I no longer represented Parker. Ethically, I couldn't sit in silence. So I typed, "Marcus, unfortunately, I'm no longer involved with the Arctic Gateway project. I cannot speak on behalf of Parker Systems, but I strongly recommend reviewing the footer on page 47 of the last verified draft, specifically the biometric gateway clause. Respectfully, Douglas Hale." 10 minutes later, another ping. It's still there. They didn't scrub the original version from our archive. If Parker can't fulfill that clause, the contract is invalid. We're holding execution until we speak with legal. I exhaled. Slow and steady. It wasn't vindication. I felt. Not even relief. It was structural integrity doing its job. From the corner of my screen, another notification popped up. An internal email from Parker's compliance lead had been leaked to the wrong Slack thread. Someone forwarded it to me. We can't override Hale's biometric lock. Contract unexecutable. Keep this internal. The fallout had officially begun. By 1:30 p.m., the story broke on Industry Pulse. Parker Systems faces contract freeze over security discrepancy. The article was swift and brutal. Anonymous sources cited leadership chaos, unauthorized documentation edits, and internal IT failures. But they weren't anonymous. I could practically hear Brent's nervous typing through the screen. And then came the foreword from Jacob, the IT analyst who had always asked the right questions. Their scrambling legals panicked. Everyone's pretending they didn't know about the clause. But they did. Gavin signed off on it last year. I leaned back in my chair. Not triumphant, just steady. They had cut me out, thinking they could inherit my position. But they forgot. You don't inherit command. You inherit code. And the gate they tried to push through, it didn't care about promotion announcements, titles, or press releases. It only cared that Douglas Hale hadn't spoken. And until he did, it would hold the line. The damage was already done by the time the Phoenix office lights flickered back on the next morning. At 6:03 a.m., the parking lot outside Parker Systems' executive wing, usually sparse, until 8 was nearly complete. Gavin Pike had called an emergency leadership meeting. Interns in business casual jogged between side doors, balancing iced coffees and manila folders like they were clutching life rafts. Inside the glass-walled boardroom, tension thickened with every breath. Lila Pike, 26, sat at the far end of the table, noticeably without makeup, hair pulled back in a loose, trembling ponytail. The confidence from the broadcast was gone. In its place, swollen eyes and a 1,000-yard stare. She stared at her laptop, waiting for a miracle. There wasn't one. The system still rejected every attempt to override the biometric sequence. Brent, the lead IT manager, looked like he hadn't slept in 48 hours. His tie was missing, and a coffee stain trailed down his wrinkled shirt. He spoke softly, hoping his tone might cushion the blow. We tried everything. Cloning the terminal, spoofing the geolocation, and even rerouting the authentication sequence through a dummy shell. Nothing works. Gavin Pike paced the room, jaw tight, knuckles white. So, you're telling me we're being held hostage by a single line of code from a retired employee? Brent's voice was brittle. Not just code, policy. The clause is embedded in the contractual architecture, which is also mirrored in the compliance agreement signed by both parties. Removing it retroactively invalidates every signature tied to it. Then why the hell didn't someone catch this sooner? Gavin barked, slamming his palm on the table. A few assistants flinched. Angela, head of legal, cleared her throat. Because, Gavin, you signed off on the biometric clause twice last December, and no one told compliance he was being forced out before deal closure. Gavin froze. Lila didn't look up. A junior analyst raised a hand from the corner. Also, sir, someone from Kestrel Logistics just posted a LinkedIn comment tagging you and the company. It's going viral. Everyone turned. On the main boardroom screen, Jacob from IT mirrored his laptop and pulled up the post. We believe in transparency. We trusted Parker Systems to do the same. We are currently pausing the final execution of the Arctic Gateway Agreement until we can verify protocol integrity. Marcus Devlin, Senior Procurement Lead, Kestrel Logistics. The silence was deafening. Lila muttered, I thought Brent said we could fix this. Brent turned slowly. I said we could try. But I also said this system was never designed to be transferred. It was designed to be protected. Angela chimed in, her voice cold now. And we're lucky Marcus hasn't filed for breach yet. The room erupted in whispers. Legal advisors, risk managers, communications lead. Everyone was talking over each other, trying to form a narrative before the media did. Too late. At 9:07 a.m., Tech Times published the story under the headline, "Parker Systems Implodes. $200 million deal collapses over executive overreach, contract tampering allegations." It included a leaked screenshot of the contract metadata, complete with timestamps showing Douglas Hale's signature as the origin, followed by an attempted overwrite 12 hours later and a system flag that logged it as unauthorized. Comments on the article were brutal. Nepotism just cost them $200 million. That's what happens when you replace expertise with vanity titles. Respect to whoever built that lockout. That's how legacy works. In the comms war room, the PR team was scrambling. A junior associate accidentally sent an internal thread to an industry reporter subject line. "We can't access Hale's gate. Contingency draft needed." By noon, the story was trending on 2 major financial subreddits, picked up by Business Insider and dissected by YouTube creators with titles like "How a 61-year-old engineer took down his own company without saying a word." Meanwhile, back at the boardroom, Lila had stopped pretending. She closed her laptop and looked straight ahead, blinking slowly as if trying to rewind time. "I didn't mean for this," she whispered. Angela replied, measured and direct. "Intent doesn't matter. Outcome does. And this? This is catastrophic." Gavin said nothing. He turned to the window, hands on his hips, watching the office skyline blur behind the tint. Then, someone asked the question, but no one wanted to voice it out loud. "Should we reach out to Douglas?" A long pause. Gavin's response came with a shaky breath. "We can't ask him to come back." "Why not?" Angela asked. "Because we didn't just let him go," he replied. "We erased him. He wasn't wrong. There had been no offboarding call. No thanks for 29 years. Just an HR form, a locked drawer, and a daughter in a designer pantsuit waiting in the wings. They didn't just cut Douglas Hale out. They tried to rewrite the story without realizing he'd authored the final chapter in code. And now, that chapter was playing out in real time, line by immutable line. The morning after the collapse, I woke early, not out of anxiety, but routine. I'd always been an early riser. For 29 years, that habit had belonged to Parker Systems. Now, it belonged only to me. The house was still. My wife had left for her volunteer shift at the hospital. The dog was curled at the foot of the couch. A pot of coffee brewed quietly in the corner of the kitchen. Outside, the Arizona air was warming dry, golden, and unbothered. I sat by the window, scrolling through headlines, each more surreal than the last. Parker Systems in crisis. $200 million contract frozen after internal protocol rejection. Douglas Hale's quiet exit raises big questions about executive integrity. The gate that wouldn't open, and the engineer who never said a word. Some included archived screenshots of internal systems. Others speculated on how the breach occurred, who had covered it up, and who had authorized the override. But the most repeated quote, the one embedded in every article, every Reddit thread, every LinkedIn post was simple. "Your contributions to the company are no longer of any value." That sentence had become a punchline, a warning, a meme, overlaid on photos of burning offices and broken crowns. I didn't laugh, not out of bitterness, but because I never needed validation. The silence, ironically, was louder than anything I could have posted. I received dozens of messages from former colleagues, clients, and even reporters fishing for an angle. I didn't respond. I didn't need to. Then, at exactly 10:42 a.m., an email arrived in my inbox. No subject, just a name in the sender field, Marcus Devlin. "Douglas, we've reviewed the audit trail. We see what happened. More importantly, we know who tried to cover it up. I'll be frank, we're terminating the agreement with Parker Systems effective immediately. That said, my team and I would like to first speak with you off the record. Not about the past, about what's next. Let me know if you're open to a conversation. Marcus." I read it twice, then leaned back in my chair. They'd lost the deal, And now the client wasn't calling Parker's new leadership. They were calling me. By 1 p.m., I was seated across from Marcus at a quiet cafe in Tempe. Nothing flashy. A corner table. No reporters. No noise. Just 2 cups of coffee and a man with tired eyes and sleeves rolled halfway up his forearms. He spoke first. I can't imagine how that felt. I shrugged. It didn't feel like anything at first. And then it felt like everything. He nodded, folding his hands. We trusted the system because we trusted the person behind it. When it stopped responding, we assumed it was a glitch. It wasn't. No, I said, stirring my coffee. It was doing exactly what it was built to do. I know, he said. That's why I'm here. He laid a folder on the table and slid it toward me. A proposal? A conversation, he corrected. We don't want to rebuild what you had. We want to build something new, leaner, smarter, centered around secure logistics infrastructure, not bloated .org charts and political seats, and we want you advising it. I opened the folder, not a contract, just a few key bullet points. Strategic advisory role, independent. Full autonomy on protocol decisions. Direct client communication. Quarterly retainer. Plus project-based incentives. No reporting chain. It wasn't a job offer. It was an invitation. Why me? I asked quietly. He smiled. Because when everything fell apart, the only thing that still held its shape was your work, the code, the judgment behind it. That wasn't luck. That was legacy. I sat with that for a while. Then I nodded. I'm in. But under one condition. Marcus raised an eyebrow. Which is? No titles, I said. No profile pages. No keynote introductions. I've had enough of my name being used by people who didn't understand what it meant. He smiled again, this time with something like respect. Fair. 2 days later, I signed the agreement from the same kitchen table where I had once read my termination notice. No boardroom, no handshake photos. Just me, my coffee, and a new laptop with zero inherited clutter. No legacy logins, no shared calendars. Just clean code and total clarity. I set up a small workspace in the guest room, turned the closet into a server cabinet, and put the original Arctic Gateway protocol on ice, archived but preserved. Not for vengeance, for reference, for the future, and, if we're lucky, for someone who'll build things right next time. I didn't gloat. I didn't return Gavin's voicemail. I didn't even read the public apology Parker Systems posted on their website, a soulless paragraph about regrettable miscommunication and technical learning opportunities. Let them chase spin. I had moved on. But the part that struck me, what stayed with me, wasn't the downfall. It was how fragile the illusion of control had been. They thought legacy was a position. They thought succession was automatic. They thought you could inherit authority like a corner office. But real authority? That's earned line by line, decision by decision, over years of showing up when no one else will. And when you erase the person who holds that weight, you don't just lose a leader. You lose the only person who could keep the gate from collapsing. And then you learn, too late, that silence isn't surrender. Sometimes it's a warning. Sometimes it's a firewall. And sometimes, if you're lucky enough to be still listening, it's an invitation to start again, correctly this time. 1 week later, I walked into the sunlit co-working studio I'd quietly rented on the outskirts of Scottsdale. No badge, no branded mug, no office politics, just a key card, a desk by the window, and a freshly assembled terminal humming beneath it. It wasn't much, but it was mine. I unpacked only the essentials: a legal pad, my favorite pen, the leather-bound notebook I'd kept since 2003, and the encrypted backup drive that contained every system I'd ever written that worked. There are no interns to manage, no redundant meetings, no emails were flagged urgent by people who had no idea what urgency meant. I took a breath. This was what freedom felt like, not flashy, not loud, quiet, intentional. Mid-morning, I got a call from Marcus. Not a Zoom invite, not a briefing, Just a call. How's the view? He asked. Unobstructed, I said. He laughed. We've got the first blueprint ready. When you're comfortable, I'd like your eyes on the architecture. I'll take a look, I said, but only if I get to decide what stays and what gets stripped out. Exactly why we came to you, he replied. No legacy noise, just judgment. I hung up and opened the schematic. Lines of potential filled the screen, untangled, unclaimed, waiting for clarity. This wasn't about rebuilding Parker systems. That chapter had closed. This was about designing something better from the ground up without the rot, the shortcuts, or the power games disguised as succession planning. The old world had collapsed, trying to replicate authority. Now, I was building a new one based not on title but on truth. And the irony? The same silence they once mistook as surrender had become my shield, edge, and gateway. Because I never wanted the crown. I built the infrastructure. I wrote the rules. And now, finally, I was free to rewrite them for good. At 4:13 p.m., sunlight streamed across the desk, casting my notebook in gold. I leaned back, stretched once, and smiled not for what had ended, but for what had just begun. People ask me if I ever regret walking away without saying a word. If I wish I had made a scene, I would have demanded recognition, called out the hypocrisy, and exposed what they tried to bury. But the truth is, I never needed to, because when a system is built with integrity, it speaks long after the architect is gone. And that's what I want people to understand. Legacy isn't what they write in a press release. It's not a title printed on glass or a chair at the end of a boardroom table. It's the quiet decisions made over the years, the systems that hold when pressure mounts, and the people who remember what you stood for long after your name is no longer on the directory. I learned that silence can be a strategy, not a weakness. That dignity holds more weight than revenge. And sometimes, the most powerful move you can make is simply stepping back and letting the cracks speak for themselves. So, if you ever find yourself erased, replaced, or told that your value has expired, pause. Remember who you are. Remember what you've built, because truth has a long memory. Eventually, the world will look not for the loudest voice, but for the one that built what lasted.